The Ryzen 7600X. Is it any good for the creators? I mean, we've got a complete new platform for the 7000 series. This is the cheapest of the CPUs. It costs roughly around $300 at the point of making this video. But is that 6 cores and 12 threads enough, even though we have super fast cores and DDR5 now? So is it any good for creators? Let's find out. What else you're gonna find out is this sponsored segment.
Looking for a cheap way to license your Windows? Check out WhoKeys through the links in the video description. Make sure to use the code TN20 to get a 30% off. Paste the license to the activation settings and you're all done. This license is for Windows 10, but you can upgrade it to Windows 11 for free. They also offer Microsoft Office 19 license. Use the same code TN20 to get a 30% off. Check out WhoKeys.com in the video description below.
First of all, I do want to say huge thanks to CCL Computers who actually got me this Ryzen 7600X. In fact, they got the whole 7000 series for me so I can provide and make this content for you. So if you're based in the UK, check out CCL online in the description below and check out their PC parts or pre-built PCs or laptops, or they've got lots of stuff over there, very affordable. So go check out CCL, and huge thanks for them for supporting the channel with these CPUs so we can create this content for you guys. So in order to make this video, I had to choose which CPUs are we going to compare this to. And I chose 3 CPUs, the previous generation 5600X, then the current generation of Intel's, equivalent, which is the 13600K, as well as the previous generation of Intel's 12600K, because at the time when this CPU was launched, 13th gen actually wasn't out, but at the moment 13th gen is out as well. So we're gonna have to look at the, all of them options, what are there available on the market. I'm not gonna go too much in depth with the CPU specs, which you can see on the screen, but some of the things I do want to highlight, which is that this 7600X has the newest or smallest process node, which is 5 nanometers compared to the 10 nanometers on the 13600K, which really is equivalent to 7 nanometer TSMC node, which this is actually, because Intel makes their own, chips, but then AMD actually gets TSMC to make the chips and then they actually produce the CPUs, if that makes sense. The only thing with this CPU is that this doesn't support DDR4, which the 13th gen and the 12th gen do support. So I guess there is no like a cheap upgrade path or bring your memory across the platform type of deal here. I do want to look at the pricing options here, and this CPU costs $300 and the 13600K is about $30 more expensive, so 10% in the CPU kind of price more expensive. The 5600X right now, I'm looking at Newegg or something like that, and it's pretty much half the price from this 7600X at $160 or $158, something like that. And then the 12600K, which we're going to be comparing in terms of the CPU kind of price alone, is about 10% cheaper, around $265 or something like that compared to this one here. So you're looking at the CPUs, it looks like it's kind of somewhere in the middle, slightly cheaper than the newest Intel one, but then we have to look at the platform cost. If we are looking at the same motherboard, I'm looking here at the ProArt lineup, so equivalent chipsets of Z690, X570 and X570E ProArt, then you can see that this 7000 Ryzen series has more expensive motherboards than the 13th gen of Intel, which is the Z690, but also slightly more expensive than the 5600X, because the X570 motherboards have gone a little bit more expensive in the price just because they're becoming like end of lifetime. So if you do want to adopt to a new platform, I really don't recommend going with Ryzen 5000 series. Go either 7000 or Intel gen, but wait for the conclusion when we're gonna get there. So what I'm trying to point out over here is that the 7000 Ryzen platform cost is more expensive than the Intel's 13th gen or 12th gen, just because you can easily go with a Z690 motherboard on the 13th gen rather than Z790, which is also out there, which has a bit more, kind of specs, but it works completely fine with also Z690 motherboards. So overall cost, the 13600K is actually 1.7% cheaper. The 5600X is about 2.8% cheaper in terms of the platform cost, and the 12600K is like the cheapest platform cost in this comparison at 7.6% cheaper. But let's have a look how do these perform. So for the test bench setup then, AMD 7000 Ryzen, we're using the Asus X670E Pro Art Creator Wi-Fi. For cooler, we're using the Asus ROG Strix LC2 360mm AIO plus 3 Fantex T30 fans. For OS, we're using Cardia C4 41TB SSD, and for project SSD, we're using the MSI M480 Spatium 2TB SSD, and it's powered by the Corsair HX 1000 power supply. The RAM and the GPU is the same as on the Intel's 12th gen and 13th gen, which is 64GB of DDR5 5200 MTS Kingston Fury Beast RGB, and then the GPU is Asus TUF RTX 3090. In terms of the Intel setup, we're using Asus Z690 Pro Art Creator Wi-Fi for 13th and 12th gen as the motherboard. The cooler is the Fantex Glacier 1 360mm AIO with the Fantex T30 fans. So they're actually the same coolers, just different manufacturers. They're the same Aesthetics coolers as on the AMD and Intel system. Intel system has Samsung 980 Pro 1TB drive as the OS drive, and the project drive is a 2TB drive, the same drive. And for the PSU, we're using Deepcool BQ1000M power supply. The Ryzen 5000 series has MSI X570 Ace Max motherboard, two 64GB of Kingston Fury Renegade RGB 3600 mega transfers per second CL18. We have the same GPU. For cooler, we're using ROG Ryujin 360mm AIO, which is the same Aesthetic cooler. For OS, we're using Cardia C440, and the project drive is 2TB 5Q to 530, and it's powered by the Corsair HX 1000 power supply. Another interesting thing I have found is that the IHS of the CPUs is quite a bit smaller. The new 7000 series CPU has the same kind of IHS, but it's cut out, and if you look at the outline of it, then they actually line up perfectly. But they've just shrinked it in the middle and made some of the IHS to be kind of the brackets where the, LGA 1718 bracket will hold onto. So it's just interesting that the IHS is smaller. The second thing is that the IHS actually has a gap underneath on the 7000 series, so you can see like underneath the actual, CPU or the IHS, you can see through it actually if you see it. And I'm not sure if you've seen the Derbauer's delidding video of the Ryzen 7000 series, but what he found that his 7600X had 2 CCXs on the CPU, which probably was either recycled, 7900X or 7950X. But in mine, I can see that I have only one CCX, because I can see that where the CCX should be, I can just see through its emptiness. There's no second CCX. I only have the CCX on the right side. Just an interesting analysis. Now, one major thing that has been changed, and what Intel actually has an advantage over the 7600X, is the memory controller of the CPU. So as you can see, the 7600X, if you have 2 sticks installed, whether you have a single rank or dual rank DDR5 modules, they support 5600 mega transfers per second. When you have 4 sticks applied, whether a single rank or dual rank, it supports 3600 mega transfers per second. So basically, when you have 4 sticks applied, the memory controller can't run all of these 4 sticks at the same fast speeds, and has to drop the speed to 3600 mega transfers per second. Compared to the Intel's 13th gen, we have a 400 mega transfers boost over the 7000, which is at 5600 mega transfers compared to the 5200 MTs, and 4000 MTs with 4 sticks compared to the 3600 MTs with 4 sticks. Now, the 7000 series is actually even slightly slower than the 12th gen in the 4 sticks. When you've got 4 sticks applied with the 12th gen, they run at 4000 compared to the 3600 MTs with the 7000. So the 4 sticks XMP or 4 sticks memory controller is really not impressive with the Ryzen 7000 series compared to the competition. Obviously, with the 2 channels, it's going to be still better than the 12th gen at 5200 MTs compared to 4800 MTs, but it's not that impressive. Now, I actually behind the scenes managed to talk to one of the Asus engineers and motherboard engineers, and they were actually really impressed with the memory controller speeds with the 13th gen and how well do these memory controllers work with DDR5, because DDR5 scaling is much bigger than the previous generations, any of the generations of DDRs. So the Ryzen 7000 memory controller is not really as impressive or as good as the competition, which basically in real world means that if you apply 2 sticks and you want to get super high speeds, like over 6000 MTs and 7000 MTs, it might not work with your Ryzen 7000 CPU just because the memory controller is not able to support that. Whether it's Gear 2 or Gear 1 or Gear 4 or whatever, it's not going to be as good as the Intel's counterparts. And if you have 4 sticks enabled and you try to have XMP there or try to massage the memory to run at 4000 MTs, even that might not work just because the memory controller of the CPU is not as good. I hope this makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, please let me know in the comment section below, because I'm working on a full ultimate guide of a DDR5 and XMP guide, because there's a lot of different kind of aspects that influence the XMP and the memory speeds of it. And it's not just the CPU, and it's not just the motherboard, it's not just the RAM. All of these things combined influence that, which I'm working on. Let me know if you want to know that, but if you want to know that, hit subscribe button because it's coming out soon. Okay, we've talked enough. Let's look at the power consumption. The 7600X pulls around 120 watts when 100% utilized at Cinebench R23, which is about 35 watts more than the previous generation. So we're really pushing the power limit here and trying to get as much out from the CPU as possible, but it's still not as much as the 13600K, which pulls 148 watts, and the 12600K actually pulls slightly less than the 7600X, even though having almost double the amount of cores. But that's only really seeing the power consumption at the high speed or maximum speed, which is kind of like fuel consumption at the, max speed that you have, something like that. So Cinebench R23, the 5600X is 21% slower in the single core score and 25% slower in the multi-core score. So, about 20 to 25% generational increase in performance is quite good. But looking at the competition, the 13th gen is still about 1% faster in the single core score, which isn't really that big of a deal. It's still okay, but the multi-core score is 60% faster, which is just ridiculous. The 12600K is only 1.5% slower in the single core score, so pretty much neck to neck with the 7600X, but the multi-core score is actually 17% faster because of the more cores and threads we have there. In Geekbench 5, we're seeing similar performance with the 5600X. The 13600K, interestingly, actually performs slower in the single core score, roughly about 7.5%, but about 52% faster in the multi-core score. The 12600K is about 11% slower now in the single core score, but 13% or 14% faster in the multi-core score. So it depends really on a test, whether we see the 13th gen or the Ryzen 7000 in the single core performance, which performs better. But now, different applications. In Blender, the 5600X is quite a bit slower now. We can see about 35 to 37% increase in the monster junk shop and classroom scenes compared to the 7600X. The 13600K is about 48 to 50% faster than the 7600X, which is absolutely ridiculous here. Now, the 12600K is not that impressive really with the more cores here, and it really shows the 7600X how good the 6 cores are and how fast they are with this 5nm process. But the monster scene is still about 3.3% fast on the 12600K. The junk shop scene is about 1% slower, and classroom scene is about 3.5% faster. So in 3D, really, usually when AMD really shines, the 7600X isn't that impressive compared to the competition here. Moving on to Photoshop, and here the story is slightly different. The 7600X beats the 5600X about 20% in the overall score, but the 13600K is still about 4% faster in the overall score, and the general score is actually 13% faster, which is absolutely insane. The 12600K though is about 8.5% slower in the overall score, which just shows that the 7600X with its really fast scores, I mean, it boosts up to 5.4 gigahertz or something like that, what I have seen here, which is absolutely ridiculous to see in just 6 cores, how fast those scores are. And Photoshop really loves those fast cores and can't really utilize that many cores. In Lightroom Classic, the 5600X is about 28% slower in the overall score, not so much slower in the active score, but the passive score is 40% slower, which is quite a bit of an increase in the new generation of CPUs. The 13600K though here is still quite a bit faster, about 18.3% faster, which is ridiculous, and about 21% faster in the actual passive scores, which almost means like there's a generational leap increase over the 7000 series in this application. The 12600K here aren't that bad compared to the 7600X and is not that much behind by only about 2.7% slower in the overall score, and active score is actually slightly faster and the passive score is about 5% slower. So the 12600K really holds the line here in terms of being the cheapest processor on the chart. Now Premiere Pro and video editing. We've gained about 18.8% from the previous generation increase, but compared to the competition, the 7600X has no chance here. We're getting absolute slaughtering from the 13600K and the 12600K. The 12600K is about 30% faster in the overall score and about 45% faster in the standard overall score, but the 13600K is about 41% faster in the extended overall score and 57% faster in the standard overall score. Now this is combined with the live playback score, which Intel has a massive leap here because the iGPU has what Intel calls QuickSync with Adobe Premiere Pro. So it uses those media engines inside the CPU that really get really good playback on the timeline with H.264 and 5 codecs. Obviously not all codecs are supported, but some of the 422 and 420 codecs are, which really shows the benefit of the iGPU on the Intel CPU. But the interesting thing is the Ryzen CPU here has an iGPU inside as well, and it's got, you know, decoders and encoders in there, but just because of AMD hasn't worked with Adobe and some of these applications here, the iGPU basically does nothing in there and prefers the NVIDIA media engines or encoders and decoders in the GPU instead of the iGPU, and can't utilize both of them, which the Intel CPU does. Intel CPU very well utilizes the iGPU and the NVIDIA actually encoders or decoders in there. Both of them together knows when to use one over the other, but with AMD it just doesn't know. It always uses the dedicated GPU and media engines rather than the iGPU. So we kind of have like a bit of a lost performance on the table there that AMD could utilize when working better with the software developers to actually get that utilized there as well. Now there's no information what the decoders can do there and, you know, what codecs are supported there. There's very little information there. But if you look at a little bit more deeper in the extended export, for example, and standard export, we can still see that the 13th and 12th gen are much better in there. If we look at the 12600K, it's 6% faster in the GPU score, 3% faster in the FX score, 3.6% faster in the standard export score. Still fair bit faster than the 7600X. And when we look at the 13600K, it's just absolutely ridiculous how much better it is, and it has just no chance in there. Moving on to Adobe After Effects, the 5600X is about 22 to 27 % slower in different parts of the benchmark, but the 12600K is pretty much neck to neck with the 7600X. Overall score only 0.7% slower, but the 13600K is about 11.8% faster in the overall score, which is just really big. Interestingly here, the 7600X has a very good GPU score, which kind of makes me scratch my head because the GPU is exactly the same on all of these platforms and we're using exactly the same drivers, everything's exactly the same, but for some reason the 7600X has about 10% increase in performance over the 13600K even in the GPU score. Let's move on to DaVinci Resolve here, and I do want to mention that the 5600X here uses a little bit of an older version of DaVinci Resolve, which is the 17.4.3 compared to the 18.0.4 version that the 7000 12th and 13th gen from Intel are using. And in my experience, I found that the DaVinci Resolve 18 has a little bit of a better performance and utilizes the hardware a little bit better. There is a slight performance kind of increase on the table still from the 5600X. So with the latest software, we're getting extra few percent there, but it doesn't make a huge difference here in this benchmark chart here. As you can see, the 5600X is still about 27 to 28% slower in the overall scores, and the 12600K is about 11% slower in the overall scores, which is measurable increase over the 12th gen with the 7600X, but the 13600K is about 4.8% faster in the extended overall score and 4% faster in the standard overall score. The 4K media score is about 18% faster. The GPU effect score here, interestingly again, is about 4.5% slower. So the GPU scores in these video editing applications are actually slightly better with the Ryzen 7000 series. Now, I do want to mention that this DaVinci Resolve benchmark doesn't use a lot of H.264 and 5 codecs, which Intel would have even bigger increase or benefit over the Ryzen 7000 series because of the iGPU, what I mentioned also in Premiere Pro. But in this DaVinci Resolve benchmark, there's not that many codecs of these, so that the iGPU doesn't really show kind of the increase there. But just so you know, if you're using with H.264 or H.265 codecs in DaVinci Resolve, the Intel processor will be like even better kind of thing. In V-Ray now, the 5600X is about 24% slower, the 13600K is 46% faster, and the 12600K is about 5% faster. So then, overall then, is this 5600X worth it over the competition? And now, at the time when this processor came out, we only had 12th gen, and it kind of looks quite promising over the 12th gen. But now with the 13th gen and the 12th gen actually dropped in price, I would recommend those CPUs, both of them, over this 7000 series Ryzen platforms, especially this 7600X, the kind of lowest in the platform, just because in video editing applications in 3D, it's not that impressive. And just the competition, what you can get for the same amount of money right now, if you're just looking at platform cost and upgrading to something, they just offer much better performance and better performance per money. Now, this 7600X though is very good for photographers. So if you do only photo editing and you maybe want a very future-proof platform, because like the 13th gen is the last kind of generation CPUs that you have there. The next generation CPUs already have a new motherboard, the new thing. So you know, you can't kind of upgrade anywhere from 13th gen, but this 7000 series AMD will have probably 9000 series, maybe even 11,000 series coming out for this. We don't know how long AMD supports this, but if we expect it to be roughly about the same support as the AM4 socket, then there's high hope for very good upgradability for this processor. So for single threaded applications, it's very, very good, like in Photoshop and Lightroom, but I'd still kind of lean over the Intel just because there's so much more performance and the bang for the buck is much better at Intel at the moment. Even if you keep the Intel for a few years and then look at the new like kind of platform cost, I don't know. I personally, if you're asking what I would do, I'm gonna go with Intel. Now, is it worth upgrading from the Ryzen 5000 series processors if you're running maybe a 5600X? Then I see no point in upgrading to this one, just because you're gonna have such a big platform cost for such a little performance increase, really about 20-25%. I'd say if the performance increase between your current system and the new system you're upgrading to is 50% or more, then it's worth upgrading, unless you're really making money and I don't know, you really need the fastest performance possible. Then, you know, yeah, get every, you know, piece of increase in performance what you get, you know, out of the new platform. But right now, the ultimate conclusion with this 7600X for creators is that it's not really a very good value for money. AMD really needs to drop the price to about $250 or even $200 for it to really look appealing for creators. If it's $250, you're kind of thinking, okay, then we're neck to neck with Intel. If it drops to $200, then I'd say, yeah, it looks very, very good budget, you know, value option there. If you're doing gaming, then this is a completely different scenario because it's still very, very good for gaming there. If you're looking at purely creators' perspective, it doesn't look very good compared to the competition. But there's rumors and I've heard talks that AMD is actually dropping the price. So check out the latest pricing for this in the description below. And if you're in the UK, go pick it up from CCL, because these guys actually helped me to support this so I can provide this helpful information to you. Check it out in the description below. And if you're at this part of the video and you're wanting to build yourself an actual creator PC, the best bang for buck creator PC, then I highly recommend checking out the best bang for buck creator PC series in the description below. There's a 4-part video series and you pick the video that's closer to your budget, all the way from $750 to about $5,000, and configure the PC to your liking, to your needs, purchase the parts, find all the tutorials to build it yourself to get the best PC for you as a creator. I highly recommend checking them out over there. I didn't talk a lot about the power consumption in this video because I'm gathering some more data with different competition, CPUs, 13th gen, 12th gen, and this 7000 series to really see the power efficiency in real world applications, because we don't need to just, measure the power efficiency at maximum speeds, like fuel consumption at max speed. Rather, we need the overall kind of workflow. How much power do we consume in the workflow? So there's that coming out. If you want to see that, hit that subscribe button so you're not going to miss that. Thanks guys for watching. Bye bye.